Carpathian Mountains, Romania, October 1944. 8 men disappeared into the mountain passes, but only Captain Moreau's blackened corpse returned. His dog tags melted through sternum to spine, his final report seared into the flesh of his palm, his eyes replaced by smoldering coals that burned for 3 days after death. I am the war maestro, and tonight we witness what happens when mankind's darkest impulses are not just summoned, but hunger to return home. By autumn of 1944, the tide of World War II had shifted dramatically across Eastern Europe. Soviet forces surged westward through Romania, while Hitler's armies retreated in disarray, frantically destroying evidence of their clandestine research programs. The Allies had intercepted disturbing communications about a mountain research facility codenamed Brekla Outpost, hidden deep in the Carpathian wilderness. Intelligence revealed this remote site housed experiments deemed too extreme even for the infamous Occult Research Division of the Third Reich, a division obsessed with weaponizing folklore and ancient myths. Operation Hellhound was hastily assembled, a final desperate attempt to secure valuable intelligence before the Soviets could claim the abandoned facility. Captain Elias Rook Moreau stood at the rear of the C-47 transport plane, watching his breath crystallize in the frigid mountain air. His Office of Strategic Services containment team consisted of 6 specialists, plus their Hungarian partisan liaison. The mission brief classified this as a simple recovery operation to secure any intelligence before the Soviets arrived. But Moreau had seen this type of assignment before, in the blood-soaked forests of Poland. He recognized the telltale bureaucratic language. When command used phrases like containment protocols and potential biohazard, they were sending men to clean up nightmares. Sergeant Nina Horvath checked her parachute straps, her face unreadable. During briefing, she had been unnaturally quiet when the target location was revealed. When pressed, she had only mumbled something about her grandfather's warnings. The woods scream red in October. 3 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. Below them, moonlight caught on jagged mountain peaks rising from dense forest. No signs of habitation, no lights, just primeval wilderness. Moreau surveyed his team. Specialist Donovan, the demolitions expert, looking unnaturally calm. Corporal Reed, communications, fingers tapping nervously against his leg. Lieutenant Hayes, intelligence officer, reviewing notes one final time. The Mason twins, security specialists, checking each other's equipment, and Dr. Hever Collins, the scientific advisor who had worked on previous on-Nerby containment operations. "Remember," Moreau shouted above the engine noise, "we're looking for documentation of Project Blackened. Intelligence believes the Germans abandoned this site 3 weeks ago. Our primary objective is denial. Nothing leaves that facility. Nothing returns with us except intelligence. If we find their research subject, termination protocols are authorized." The light turned green. One by one, they leapt into the darkness. As Moreau jumped last, the bitter mountain air struck his face like a physical blow. During free fall, he spotted something unusual in the forest below, a perfect circle where no trees grew, centered around what appeared to be a concrete structure, partially embedded in the mountainside. As his parachute deployed with a sharp jerk, Moreau felt a sensation he had experienced only once before, in the blood-soaked forests of Poland. The distinctly unnerving feeling of being watched by something ancient and hungry. The wind shifted, carrying an acrid smell like burning hair and sulfur. Below, in the perfect circle of cleared forest, something moved with deliberate purpose. No partisan scouts had reported back. No German personnel had been observed evacuating. By all accounts, Schloss Brekla should be abandoned. And yet, Moreau could swear he saw embers glowing in the darkness, moving with four-legged purpose through the trees. Sergeant Nina Horvath checked her parachute straps, her face tight with unspoken dread. Throughout the mission briefing, She had remained unnaturally silent when the target location was revealed. When Moreau had pressed her, she'd only mumbled something about her grandfather's warnings. The woods scream red in October. 3 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. Below them, moonlight caught on jagged mountain peaks rising from dense forest. No signs of habitation, no lights, just primeval wilderness concealing secrets. Moreau surveyed his team one final time. Specialist Donovan, the demolitions expert, looking unnaturally calm. Corporal Reed, communications, fingers tapping nervously against his leg. Lieutenant Hayes, intelligence officer, reviewing notes by flashlight. The Mason twins, security specialists, checking each other's equipment with practiced precision. And Dr. Priest, Collins, the scientific advisor, who had worked on previous containment operations in Norway. Remember, Moreau shouted above the engine noise. We're looking for documentation of Project Blackhound. Intelligence believes the enemy abandoned this site 3 weeks ago. Our primary objective is denial. Nothing leaves that facility. Nothing returns with us except intelligence. If we find their research subject, termination protocols are authorized. The light turned green. One by one, they leapt into the darkness. As Moreau jumped last, the bitter mountain air struck his face like a physical blow. During free fall, he spotted something unusual in the forest below. A perfect circle where no trees grew, centered around what appeared to be a concrete structure partially embedded in the mountainside. They landed in a small clearing 2 kilometers from the target. Immediately, Moreau sensed something was wrong. The forest was unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, not even whined through the pines. The air tasted metallic, carrying faint traces of ash and something like scorched bone. No local contact, Hayes whispered, scanning the tree line. The partisan scouts were supposed to mark the approach route. Horvath knelt, examining disturbed earth near a massive oak. They were here. She held up a shred of fabric. Romanian partisan armband. But they left in a hurry. She pointed to the scattered tracks. Not in formation, running. Moreau signaled for the team to establish a perimeter while he conferred with Horvath. What aren't you telling me, Sergeant? She glanced toward the mountain peak looming above them. This place. My village elders speak of it. They call it the burning ground. Old stories say a beast lives in these mountains. Not wolf, not bear. Something the ancient ones trapped with blood magic. The locals avoid this forest, especially in autumn when the boundary thins. We don't have time for folklore, Hayes interrupted, spreading a map on a flat rock. The facility should be approximately 1 kilometer northeast, built into that ridge. As the team gathered equipment, Collins approached Moreau, his scientific skepticism visibly shaken. Captain, the instrumentation is showing unusual readings. Background radiation levels are elevated, but inconsistently. And there's something else. He held up a compass whose needle spun wildly. Magnetic anomalies could be caused by mineral deposits. Collins continued, not sounding convinced by his own explanation. But I've never seen patterns like this. It's as if the laws of physics themselves are disturbed here. A distant, hollow sound echoed through the trees. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but somewhere horrifyingly between. The temperature dropped suddenly, their breath becoming visible in the chill. Movement, one of the Mason twins whispered, raising his rifle. 11 o'clock, approximately 200 yards. Through his field glasses, Moreau watched as something large moved between the distant trees. Its outline was wrong, the proportions unnatural, its movements jerky yet purposeful. In the brief glimpse before it disappeared behind a rocky outcropping, Moreau saw what appeared to be glowing embers trailing in its wake. We proceed with caution, Moreau ordered, unable to shake the growing certainty that they were being watched, hunted. And we stay together. No matter what we find up there, no one separates from the group. The team approached the concrete structure as dawn broke across the mountains, casting long shadows through the twisted pines. The facility entrance gaped open like a wound in the mountainside, a heavy blast door wrenched from its hinges, lying crumpled 20 feet from the entrance. Something had forced its way out, not in. "Standard breach formation," Moreau ordered, his voice steady despite the dread pooling in his gut. "Mason twins on point. Collins, stay behind me. Horvath, watch our six." As they entered, the stench hit them. The unmistakable odor of charred human remains mingled with something sulfurous and alien. Their flashlight beams cut through darkness, revealing a reception chamber where administrative workstations stood abandoned. Papers scattered across the floor bore official military research division stamps, but something more disturbing drew Moreau's attention: black, sooty paw prints marking the concrete floor, walls, and even the ceiling in chaotic patterns. Each print appeared scorched into the surface, as if made by burning metal pressed against stone. "Those aren't animal tracks I recognize," Horvath whispered, her rifle trained on the shadows. "Too large for wolf, wrong shape for bear." Dr. Collins knelt to examine one print, carefully avoiding direct contact. "The residue appears to be carbon and ash, but there's something else. Metallic compounds I can't identify without proper equipment." They proceeded deeper, finding a security checkpoint where 2 guards had died at their posts. The bodies were desiccated, mummified, not by time, but intense heat. Their skin had blackened and contracted, pulling back from teeth in eternal screams. Most disturbing were the wounds, massive bite marks where flesh had been torn away, yet cauterized at the edges, as if whatever had bitten them burned at impossible temperatures. "Those are defensive wounds," Hayes noted clinically, though his voice wavered. "They were fighting something off. And look, their bullets didn't stop it." He pointed to impact marks on the far wall, where lead had melted and run down the concrete in silvery rivulets. In what appeared to be a central research area, they discovered a projector and several film canisters labeled "Subject Containment Protocols and Feeding Behaviors." Moreau ordered Reed to set up the equipment, while the others secured the perimeter. The flickering footage showed a circular chamber with iron walls. Scientists in protective suits observed from behind glass as a massive quadrupedal creature paced the enclosure. The film quality was poor, but even in grainy black and white, they could see the beast was wrong. Its proportions unnatural, its movements both fluid and jerky in impossible ways. Most disturbing was its ribcage, visible through what appeared to be charred skin, glowing with internal heat, embers falling from its body with each movement. Another film showed the creature being fed, a prisoner pushed into the chamber. The prisoner's screams were silent in the soundless film, but his terror was unmistakable as the beast circled him. What happened next caused even Donovan to turn away. The creature didn't just attack. It seemed to consume something invisible emanating from the prisoner, who collapsed into himself, withering as if his very essence was being extracted. Only then did the beast tear into the physical remains. "It doesn't just feed on flesh," Collins whispered. "Look at the researchers' notes." He pointed to a logbook. They believed it fed on emotion, pain, fear, hatred. The physical consumption was secondary. Moreau felt the hairs rise on his neck as he realized they had yet to find the containment chamber shown in the film. "Where was this chamber located?" he asked, searching the facility schematics spread across a nearby desk. Hayes pointed to a level below them. "Sub-basement. Designated primary containment." "But Captain," he hesitated. "The notes indicate the beast was caged using some kind of ritual. Iron chains inscribed with symbols, arranged in specific patterns." "One of the chains is missing," Collins added, examining the inventory list. "Removed 2 days before the facility was abandoned." A low, pulsing sound vibrated through the facility, causing dust to drift from the ceiling. Not a howl, but something like a heartbeat, massive and echoing through the mountain itself. "It's still here," Horvath said, her face ashen, "and it knows we are too." Moreau ordered an immediate descent to the sub-basement to inspect the containment chamber. The stairwell leading down was a twisted mass of shadows, each footstep echoing ominously. Halfway down, they discovered the first sign of survivors. A man huddled in an alcove, rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. Dr. Conrad Freisinger. Hayes identified him after checking his identification tags. Research director for Project Blackhound. The man's eyes were bloodshot, his uniform torn and singed in peculiar patterns. When Moreau approached, Freisinger shrank back, scratching at the walls until his fingernails split and bled. "It hunts what burns inside," Freisinger whispered, his English heavily accented but clear. "Not bred, summoned. We only unsealed it. Ancient Romanian thing. The locals knew. We should have listened." Collins attempted to examine him, but the scientist batted his hands away. "Not German weapon," he insisted. "We found writings in old monastery. Ritual to trap forest demon. We thought to control it. Weapon against Russians." A broken laugh escaped him. "Cannot control fire with paper hands." "What happened here?" Moreau demanded, his patience wearing thin. "Host-vector imbalance," Freisinger replied, as if this explained everything. "It requires emotional anchor, hatred, pain. We fed it prisoners, but grew too strong. Broke containment when power failed." His eyes darted to the shadows. "Feeding now. Growing. Learning our weaknesses." As they continued toward the sub-basement, Reed's radio crackled with static that formed patterns almost like words. The air grew increasingly hot, despite the mountain cold that should have penetrated the concrete structure. A tension spread through the team, invisible but palpable. Donovan suddenly whirled, pointing his weapon at Hayes. "You've been undermining this mission from the start," he snarled, his face contorted with unfamiliar rage. "Stand down, specialist," Moreau ordered, but Donovan's finger tightened on the trigger. "He's a spy. I heard him on the radio last night, reporting to Moscow." Hayes backed away, his own expression darkening. "That's rich coming from you. I've seen how you look at the maps, planning your own extraction, aren't you?" Within moments, the unit fractured. The Mason twins stood back to back, suddenly suspicious of everyone. Collins retreated into stunned silence. Reed tore off his headset, claiming the voices were getting louder. Only Horvath seemed to understand what was happening. "This is what it does," she said, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. "Don't you see? It feeds on fire, not just physical flame, but what burns inside us. Hatred, fear, suspicion. The beast creates these feelings, then consumes them." Moreau felt it too, an unnatural rage building, foreign thoughts intruding, images of betrayal, memories of battlefield horrors twisted and amplified. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on the mission parameters. "It's psychological warfare," he announced, his training reasserting itself. "Some kind of induced paranoia. Focus on your training. Remember who we are." But Donovan was beyond reason. With a primal scream, he charged at Hayes, knocking him to the ground. The others moved to separate them, but the violence was contagious, spreading like wildfire through the team. As they fought, the temperature rose dramatically. The walls seemed to pulse with heat. From deeper within the facility came that same rhythmic sound, stronger now, like a massive heart beating faster in anticipation. The operation was never to contain it, Moreau realized aloud, pulling Horvath away from the fray. Command knew this was a suicide mission. "We're not here to capture intelligence. We're here to die keeping this thing locked away." Horvath's eyes widened in understanding. "My village elders said it can never be killed, only contained, through sacrifice." In the midst of their realization, a blood-curdling scream cut through the chaos. Donovan stood frozen, his mouth open in a silent howl, as ember-like lights danced beneath his skin. Before their eyes, he began to wither, his flesh contracting around his bones as something invisible was drawn out of him. In the shadows beyond, two burning coals gleamed, eyes watching, waiting. The remaining team members retreated to the central research area, dragging Donovan's withered remains. His body weighed almost nothing, as if something essential had been extracted, leaving only a husk. The fighting had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence, as each soldier battled the invasive thoughts threatening to overwhelm them. "We need to find the containment chamber," Moreau ordered, forcing authority into his voice, despite the creeping dread. "Whatever this thing is, it was contained before. It can be contained again." They descended further into the facility, following emergency lighting that flickered erratically. The walls narrowed, transitions from processed concrete to rough-hewn stone. This level had been built into an existing cave system within the mountain. Ancient carvings marked the stone, symbols that predated modern language. The passage opened into a massive circular chamber. In its center lay a deep pit ringed with iron bars, each inscribed with intricate symbols now partially melted and deformed. The most disturbing feature was the chamber walls, decorated not with paint or carvings, but with bodies. Research personnel had been fused into the stone itself, their flesh blackened and contracted, faces locked in eternal screams as they reached outward, trying to escape something at the center. "My God," Hayes whispered, his earlier aggression replaced by naked terror. Collins approached one of the bodies, examining it with scientific detachment that barely masked his horror. The fusion with the rock is complete, molecular, impossible by any known physics. On the far side of the chamber stood a massive ritual circle inscribed into the floor. The outer ring remained intact, but the inner patterns were shattered, as if something had broken through from below. "This is how they contained it," Freisinger explained, having followed them down. His initial madness seemed to have receded, replaced by resigned clarity. Ancient binding ritual. Romanian mountain tribes used it centuries ago to trap what they called Zburator Negru, the black flyer. Not demon, not beast. A curse-given form. Horvath nodded grimly. "My grandfather spoke of it, a spirit of hatred bound by iron and blood. It cannot be killed, only contained." The chamber's temperature rose suddenly, the air becoming thick and difficult to breathe. The remaining Mason twin collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "Something's inside," he gasped. "Inside my thoughts. Digging. Hunting." Before anyone could reach him, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he began convulsing violently. "It's harvesting his rage," Freisinger observed clinically. "His fear. The strongest emotions first." "How do we stop it?" Moreau demanded, fighting his own growing terror. Freisinger gestured to a heavy iron chain coiled near the broken ritual circle. One person must walk into its path willingly, carrying the binding chain, complete sacrifice, not just body, but spirit. The beast consumes the bearer, but becomes entangled in the binding. "You're suggesting suicide," Hayes snapped. "I'm suggesting containment," Freisinger corrected. "The chain must be offered freely, with knowledge of the cost. The ancient tribes chose criminals, forcing them to atone through sacrifice. We selected prisoners, but the hatred in their hearts only fed its strength." The Mason twins' convulsions stopped abruptly. He lay still, eyes staring vacantly as ember-like glow faded beneath his skin. Beyond the chamber entrance, moving shadows coalesced into something tall and distorted. The temperature spike became unbearable. Moreau made his decision. "Evacuate the facility. Get everything we found back to command. Tell them what happened here." "Captain, you can't be considering," Reed began. "That's an order, Corporal," Moreau interrupted. He stepped forward, lifting the heavy chain. The links burned his hands, but he ignored the pain. "Someone needs to finish this mission." Horvath moved beside him. The beast feeds on guilt, trauma, violence. Her eyes met his. What makes you think you're strong enough to contain it alone? Because I've carried worse inside me since Poland, Moreau answered quietly. The things I've seen, the orders I've followed, the lines I've crossed. He coiled the chain around his arm, each link searing into his flesh. Some monsters we create ourselves. Through the doorway, the creature finally revealed itself. A four-legged form of charred flesh and exposed bone, embers falling from an open ribcage with each movement. Its eyes burned with intelligence and ancient hunger. Go, Moreau ordered his team one final time. I'll buy you time to escape. As the others retreated up the passage, Moreau stood alone before the beast, chain in hand, ready to make his final sacrifice. The team hesitated at Moreau's order. Hayes grabbed his arm, but Moreau shook him off. That's a direct order, Lieutenant. Get everyone out. The intelligence is what matters now. Reluctantly, the survivors began their retreat, all except Horvath, who stood her ground beside him. My grandfather died fighting this thing, she said quietly. The binding requires two souls, one to lead, one to seal. The creature prowled the edges of the chamber, its movements both fluid and jagged, defying natural motion. With each step, embers fell from its exposed ribcage, igniting small fires that died almost instantly, as if the concrete itself rejected the unnatural heat. Its eyes, not eyes, but twin points of concentrated flame, fixed on Moreau with ancient intelligence. It recognizes you, Freisinger whispered, lingering at the entrance. It sees what burns within you. Moreau felt the creature's presence, invading his mind, sifting through memories like hands through ashes. The massacre at Lublin he'd been ordered to ignore. The civilian casualties in Normandy deemed acceptable losses. The suspected collaborator he'd executed without sufficient evidence. All the guilt, rage, and doubt he'd buried beneath layers of duty and discipline. Get out now, Moreau ordered again, his voice strained. That's final. This time they obeyed, even Freisinger, though the scientist paused at the threshold. Remember, Captain, the chain must encircle both you and the beast, complete the binding with blood and regret. It's the only way. Now alone with Horvath, Moreau uncoiled the heavy chain. Each link bore inscriptions in a language older than Rome, symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. The metal burned his palms, but he welcomed the physical pain as an anchor against the psychological assault. There's no need for both of us to die here, he told Horvath. She checked her weapon methodically. There's no need for either of us to die, but necessity isn't why we're here. Her eyes met his. I've seen what this thing does to my homeland. The stories aren't just folklore. Every generation it escapes. Every generation, someone must cage it again. The creature circled closer, its movements becoming more agitated. The air shimmered with heat, distorting reality around them. Moreau felt his resolve weakening, as memories were prized from his mind, not just his own sins, but the faces of every man lost under his command, every mission that ended in blood and failure. It's trying to break us before we can bind it, Horvath gasped, clearly experiencing her own psychological torment. The pain, the guilt, that's how it feeds. Then we give it something else, Moreau decided. He dropped to one knee, wrapping one end of the chain around his wrist until the links cut into flesh. Blood flowed over the ancient symbols, which began to glow with orange light. Not guilt, not pain, purpose, acceptance. The beast charged suddenly, covering the distance in an impossible burst of speed. Moreau stood his ground, chain extended, speaking the words Freisinger had taught him, not in English or German, but in the ancient Romanian dialect of the mountain tribes. I offer myself as vessel and cage. I accept your burden as mine. Horvath moved with surprising speed, flanking the creature as it leapt toward Moreau. She threw her section of chain like a lasso, catching the beast's hindquarters. Her voice joined Moreau's in the ritual binding. Blood pays for blood. Fire contains fire. The creature's impact drove Moreau to the ground, its burning form scorching through his uniform to the flesh beneath. The pain was beyond description, not just physical agony, as his skin blackened, but spiritual violation, as the beast tried to consume his essence. Together, he and Horvath pulled the chains tight, forming a binding circle that glowed with supernatural light. The chamber filled with a howl that existed somewhere between sound and emotion, rage and hunger, and ancient hatred given voice. The temperature climbed beyond human tolerance. Moreau's vision began to fade at the edges, his consciousness slipping away. He saw Horvath fall to her knees, blood streaming from her eyes and ears as the binding ritual reached its peak. In his final moments of clarity, Moreau realized the truth behind Operation Hellhound. Command hadn't sent them to contain a Nazi weapon. They'd sent them to recage an ancient evil that had been temporarily weaponized, one that would soon have been loose in the world again. As darkness claimed him, Moreau felt the chain burning through his flesh, fusing with bone, becoming part of him as he became part of the binding. His last conscious thought was of Horvath, wondering if she had strength enough to escape to warn the others. Through the white-hot agony, he heard the beast whisper in his mind, "The cage is broken, but the leash burns still." 3 days later, a Soviet advance unit discovered Sergeant Nina Horvath stumbling through the mountain passes, her body ravaged by exposure and internal injuries. Her uniform bore strange burn patterns that medics likened to chain links seared into flesh. Though feverish and disoriented, she maintained enough clarity to warn the Soviet commander about the facility, insisting the mountain must be sealed immediately. The Soviets, initially skeptical, changed their assessment upon reaching the Brekla facility's perimeter. Official reports documented an unexplained thermal anomaly that made approach impossible. Radiation detectors registered readings that fluctuated wildly, defying known physics. Reconnaissance photographs showed the facility entrance had collapsed, with unusual burn patterns extending outward like dark veins through the surrounding forest. In a rare moment of Cold War cooperation, Soviet High Command contacted Allied forces regarding their findings. By December 1944, both Soviet and Allied powers had classified the Carpathian site as a Level 4 quarantine zone. Artillery bombardment sealed the mountain entrance completely, and within 6 months, the location was removed from military maps entirely. OSS headquarters in London received a partial mission report compiled from the surviving team members' testimony. Hayes, Reed, and Collins had managed to escape, carrying samples and documentation that were immediately confiscated and classified. Dr. Freisinger disappeared during transport to an Allied detention facility, though rumors persisted of a Romanian-speaking scientist working for Soviet occult research divisions in the early Cold War years. The final report on Operation Hellhound, filed under Occult Asset Recovery Failure, site-sealed indefinitely, included several appendices detailing similar containment sites throughout Eastern Europe, ancient locations where folklore and strategic military value intersected. A handwritten note on the cover sheet read simply, "The leash burns still." In military hospitals across Europe, physicians documented a strange phenomenon among surviving veterans who had operated near the Carpathian containment zone. Many reported identical nightmares featuring a burning quadruped creature with exposed ribs, dragging chains that glowed like hot iron. Most disturbing were the reports from men who had never heard of Operation Hellhound yet described Captain Moreau in perfect detail, walking eternally beside the beast. One hand fused to a chain that bound both captor and captive together. By 1956, NATO established Protocol 7734 for identifying and monitoring potential folklore containment zones across former Axis territory. Special units, operating under scientific cover, were tasked with maintaining old bindings and performing occasional renewal rituals at sites where ancient horrors had been temporarily weaponized during wartime desperation. Sergeant Horvath never returned to military service. After extensive debriefing, she was quietly discharged with full honors and a lifetime pension conditional upon her silence. She returned to her village in the Hungarian border region, where locals noted she took up her grandfather's role as keeper of old warnings. Each October, she led a small procession into the mountains, leaving offerings of iron and blood at boundary stones marked with symbols no modern linguist could translate. In her personal journal, discovered after her death in 1992, Horvath's final entry read, "The beast cannot die, for it was never truly alive. It exists as hatred given form, rage given purpose." Moreau understood this in the end. The only way to contain such darkness is to embrace it, to accept it as part of oneself. His sacrifice wasn't just physical. He gave up his humanity to become the eternal cage. I feel him still, in my dreams, walking the burning path between worlds. The ritual continues through him. The cage is broken, but the leash burns eternal. May God forgive what we unleashed. May Moreau find peace in his endless duty. The Carpathian site remains restricted to this day, surrounded by monitoring stations disguised as environmental research outposts. Satellite imagery shows the area has never recovered, a perfect circle of barren earth that local wildlife instinctively avoid. Thermal imaging reveals unusual heat signatures that military analysts refuse to comment on, except to note that they move with purpose during October nights, always contained within the designated quarantine zone. The leash, it seems, burns still. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left embers in your mind, heed the call to join our ranks. Check your surroundings. Is that a faint smell of ash in the air? Subscribe to unlock more classified military horrors before they're sealed away. Activate the notification bell. Some warnings must be received immediately when containment protocols fail. Share this account with fellow soldiers of the dark, who understand that the most chilling horrors come from battlefields both known and forgotten. Remember, some chains are still being forged, and the leash burns eternal.